I used to believe love was straightforward. You meet someone, you feel something, you decide if it's strong enough, you move forward. Simple. At least that's what I told myself. Love in my mind was a clean equation. Compatibility plus attraction plus timing equals relationship. No overthinking, no internal debates, no emotional knots. And then she showed up. And nothing felt simple anymore. It wasn't because she created drama. It wasn't because she was inconsistent. It wasn't because she played games. It was because she made me feel more than I was prepared to manage. And feelings, when they deepen, complicate everything. Before her, I operated with clarity. If I liked someone, I knew quickly. If it didn't feel right, I walked away easily. If something felt uncertain, I stepped back without hesitation. There was efficiency in my emotions. Control, distance, logic. Then she entered quietly. Not loud, not overwhelming, just present, and presence changed the rhythm of everything. At first, I tried to categorize what I felt: excitement, infatuation, curiosity, but it didn't fit neatly into any of those. It felt steady, and steady confused me. Steady doesn't create adrenaline, it creates attachment, and attachment introduces vulnerability. That's where things got complicated. Not because she complicated them, because I did. The more I felt, the more I analyzed. The more I analyzed, the more I questioned. The more I questioned, the more I tried to simplify something that wasn't meant to be reduced. I thought love was simple because I had never let it reach depth. I kept things at the surface. Surface feelings are easy. You enjoy the moment. You walk away if it shifts. You protect yourself without effort. But depth doesn't allow that. Depth demands accountability. Depth requires patience. Depth exposes fears. She made me aware of fears I didn't know I carried. Fear of losing control. Fear of caring more. Fear of not being able to detach if needed. Fear of building something that might change. Love isn't complicated because of the other person. It's complicated because it forces you to confront yourself. And that's what happened. I started noticing how much I thought about her. Not obsessively, intentionally. How her reactions mattered to me. How her opinions carried weight. How her mood affected my own. That level of integration wasn't simple. It was layered. I thought love was just emotion. I didn't realize it was identity shift. When you truly love someone, your decisions start including them. Your future starts imagining them. Your priorities subtly adjust. That shift isn't chaotic, it's transformative. But transformation rarely feels simple. I found myself hesitating more, not because I doubted her, because I felt the weight of what I was building. When something matters deeply, you move carefully. And careful feels complicated. I used to think love was about feeling right. Now I see it's about growing right. Growth introduces discomfort. Discomfort introduces questions. Questions introduce complexity. She didn't change who I was. She revealed who I hadn't allowed myself to be. More open, more patient, more emotionally honest. And that honesty complicated everything. Because once you admit depth, you can't pretend it's light. I thought love was simple because I treated it like a choice between yes and no. With her, it became something else. It became, how do we build this well? How do we protect it? How do we grow without losing ourselves? Those questions don't have quick answers. There were moments I wished it felt easier. Moments I missed the simplicity of surface-level connection, because surface doesn't require risk. But risk is where meaning lies. She complicated everything by being steady, by being consistent, by not giving me a reason to walk away, by being someone worth investing in. Investment isn't simple, it's intentional, and intention requires awareness. I had to confront parts of myself I'd ignored, my avoidance patterns, my need for control, my habit of detaching before things got too real. She didn't call them out harshly. She simply stayed present long enough for me to notice them. And noticing yourself is uncomfortable, but necessary. I thought love was simple, but I confused simplicity with avoidance. Real love isn't chaotic. It's complex, not because it's unstable, because it's layered with shared dreams, shared fears, shared responsibility, shared growth. It's not about two people feeling something. It's about two people choosing something repeatedly. And repetition isn't simple. It requires discipline. She complicated everything because she made it worth the effort, worth the patience, worth the vulnerability, worth the growth. And now I understand something I didn't before. Love isn't simple. It's deliberate. It asks you to show up when it's inconvenient, to communicate when it's uncomfortable, to stay present when retreat feels easier. That complexity isn't a problem. It's proof of depth. I thought love was simple until she complicated everything, and I'm grateful she did. Because in that complication, I found clarity. The parts of me she exposed. I didn't expect love to feel like self-examination. I thought it would feel like comfort, like ease, like something that fit neatly into the life I'd already built. But when she stepped into my world, she didn't disrupt it. She revealed it. And that revelation made everything feel more complicated than I was used to. Before her, I operated with emotional efficiency. If something felt good, I enjoyed it. If something felt uncertain, I stepped back. If someone required too much, I recalibrated or left. It was simple, at least on the surface. But simplicity can sometimes be distance disguised as control. And I didn't realize how much distance I had built into my patterns until she didn't give me a reason to use it. She didn't chase. She didn't test. She didn't create drama to measure my reaction. She simply stayed consistent. And consistency is harder to navigate than chaos. Because chaos gives you an excuse to leave. Consistency forces you to stay and examine yourself. I started noticing how much I guarded my independence, not in an obvious way, in subtle ways. I would hold back full vulnerability. I would share, but not completely. I would commit, but with internal exit plans. I called it being realistic, but she called it something softer once. Why do you prepare for loss before it exists? That question stayed with me. I didn't think I was preparing for loss. I thought I was being responsible. But love isn't built on preemptive detachment. It's built on present commitment. And commitment felt heavier than I had allowed before. She complicated everything because she didn't let me stay half invested. Not through pressure, through presence. When someone shows up consistently, you either rise to meet them or retreat. And retreat wasn't justified. So I had to rise. Rising meant confronting parts of myself that were comfortable staying untouched. My need to feel in control. My instinct to analyze feelings instead of sit with them. My habit of keeping depth compartmentalized. She didn't attack those traits. She just existed steadily enough for me to notice them. I began to understand that love isn't complicated because it's unstable. It's complicated because it exposes what you've avoided. I avoided full vulnerability. She made vulnerability feel natural. I avoided reliance. She made partnership feel strong. I avoided deep emotional accountability. She made accountability feel grounding. That shift wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. And quiet growth is uncomfortable because it doesn't distract you with intensity. It forces reflection. I remember a moment when we disagreed about something small. In the past, I would have retreated slightly, not dramatically, just enough to regain emotional balance. But with her, I stayed. Not because I felt trapped, because I wanted resolution more than I wanted control. That was new. Wanting resolution over control complicates love because it requires humility. And humility asks you to admit you're wrong sometimes, to apologize without justification, to listen without preparing your defense. She complicated everything because she made ego irrelevant. In her presence, ego felt unnecessary. It didn't add strength. It created distance. And distance wasn't what I wanted anymore. I thought love was simple because I treated it like a feeling. But feelings fluctuate. Commitment stabilizes. And commitment introduces layers. Layers of responsibility. Layers of communication. Layers of shared planning. I started thinking about the future differently, not in grand romantic gestures. In practical questions, can we navigate financial stress? Can we handle career shifts? Can we grow without competing? Can we support without losing individuality? Those questions don't feel simple, but they feel real. Real love asks real questions, and real questions don't have easy answers. She complicated everything by being someone worth building with, worth adjusting for, worth evolving alongside. If she had been inconsistent, I could have kept things simple. If she had been dramatic, I could have labeled it unstable. If she had played games, I could have protected myself. But she did none of that. She was steady, and steadiness demands depth. Depth isn't convenient. It requires time. It requires patience. It requires sitting in uncertainty without escaping. I noticed how my identity began to shift. Not dramatically, subtly. I considered her when making decisions. I communicated more clearly. I reflected before reacting. Those shifts aren't explosive, but they're transformative. Transformation isn't simple. It's layered. It challenges patterns. It invites growth. It stretches comfort. There were moments I wondered if love was supposed to feel easier, less complex, less reflective. But then I realized something. Ease without growth is stagnation. Complexity with alignment is evolution. And I'd rather evolve. She complicated everything by making me want to be better. Not because she demanded it, because she inspired it. I became more patient, more present, more willing to communicate before assumptions took over. Those changes weren't required, they were chosen. And choosing growth is rarely simple. I thought love was simple because I thought it was about compatibility. Now I see it's about collaboration. Collaboration requires negotiation, adjustment, compromise, humility. She didn't complicate love. She revealed its true nature, layered, intentional, demanding in the best way. Love isn't complicated because it's chaotic. It's complicated because it's meaningful. And meaning always carries weight. I no longer wish it felt simple. Simple fades. Depth lasts. And depth requires complexity. I thought love was simple, until she complicated everything. And in that complication, I discovered something stronger than simplicity. I discovered intention, the complexity I didn't know I needed. I used to admire simplicity, clean decisions, clear emotions, straight lines from feeling to action. I thought that was maturity. If something felt right, move forward. If something felt right, move forward. If something felt wrong, step away. If something felt uncertain, protect yourself. That framework kept life organized, predictable, safe. But when she came into my life, I realized something uncomfortable. Safe isn't the same as alive. She didn't complicate my life with drama. She complicated it with depth. And depth doesn't fit neatly into clean lines. Depth curves. It overlaps. It forces you to slow down. I began noticing how much more intentional I became around her. Before I could move quickly, decide quickly, to date quickly. With her, I moved carefully, I listened longer, I reflected more, I asked myself harder questions. Why does this matter so much? Why does her reaction stay with me? Why does the thought of losing this feel heavier than usual? Those weren't surface-level questions. They were identity-level questions, and identity-level questions are rarely simple. She didn't create insecurity, she created significance. And significance demands attention. When something significant enters your life, you don't handle it casually. You handle it consciously. Conscious love is layered. It requires awareness of your patterns. It requires examining your defense mechanisms. It requires choosing vulnerability over comfort. I started seeing how often I prepared for retreat, not outwardly, internally, keeping emotional space just in case. But with her, that space started to feel unnecessary. An unnecessary space feels like distance. Distance protects, but it also prevents intimacy. And intimacy is what I found myself wanting. I didn't just want her presence, I wanted her perspective, her partnership, her influence in my decisions. That realization felt complicated. Because influence means interdependence, and interdependence challenges independence. I'd always valued self-sufficiency, handling my own emotions, solving my own problems, maintaining control over my internal world. But she made shared emotional processing feel safe. She didn't try to solve everything. She simply stayed present. And presence changes you. When someone stays present with you consistently, your defenses soften. Not because you're forced, because you trust. And trust adds layers. Layers of expectation. Layers of responsibility. Layers of care. Care is complicated. Because when you care deeply, you can't pretend indifference. You can't dismiss discomfort easily. You can't walk away casually. And walking away casually had always been my safety net. She complicated everything because she made walking away feel wrong. Not impossible, just wrong. And that forced me to confront something I hadn't before. I don't want simple if simple means shallow. I want meaningful, even if meaningful requires complexity. Meaningful love isn't about ease. It's about alignment. Alignment in communication. Alignment in growth. Alignment in growth resolution. We've disagreed. We've misinterpreted tone. We've navigated misunderstandings. But what's changed is how we repair. Repair doesn't feel like a battle. It feels like collaboration. That's not simple. That's intentional. Intentional love requires humility. It requires saying, I could have handled that better. It requires listening when you'd rather defend. It requires staying when you'd rather defend. It requires staying when leaving feels easier. I used to think love was about compatibility alone. Now I see it's about capacity. Capacity to grow. Capacity to forgive. Capacity to communicate consistently. Capacity to prioritize the relationship over ego. She expanded my capacity, not by demanding it, by modeling it. Her steadiness challenges my impulsiveness. Her patience softens my defensiveness. Her clarity sharpens my accountability. That expansion feels complicated because growth always does. Growth stretches comfort, it exposes blind spots, it demands reflection. I began noticing how my internal dialogue shifted. Instead of asking, does this feel good? I started asking, is this sustainable? Instead of, is this exciting? I asked, is this assigning? I answered, is quieter than excitement, but it's stronger. She complicated my idea of love because she made me redefine it. Love isn't just chemistry, it's collaboration. It's not just attraction, it's accountability. It's not just passion, it's accountability. It's not just passion. It's partnership introduces responsibility. Responsibility to communicate when you're tired, responsibility to apologize quickly, responsibility to protect trust, responsibility to grow even when it's uncomfortable. I didn't think I wanted that level of depth, because depth removes the illusion of control. It requires vulnerability, and vulnerability used to feel risky. Now it feels necessary. Necessary because without it, connection stays surface level. And surface level connection, while simple, lacks foundation. She complicated everything by being someone I couldn't reduce to easy. Easy would have allowed detachment. Easy would have allowed indifference. She didn't allow either, through no pressure of her own, just through authenticity. Authenticity invites depth. Depth invites reflection. Reflection invites growth. And growth complicates simplicity. But here's where I've realized. Complexity doesn't mean chaos. It means richness. It means layers. It means substance. Simple love might feel light, but layered love feels strong, and strength is what I'm drawn to now. I don't resent the complication. I appreciate it, because it forced me to mature, to communicate better, to show up more intentionally, to value consistency over intensity. I thought love was simple, until she complicated everything. And now I understand that the complication wasn't confusion. It was growth. And growth, while layered, is worth it. The beautiful complication. There was a moment, not dramatic, not cinematic, when I realized I didn't want simple anymore. I used to chase simplicity because it felt efficient. No emotional mess, no second guessing, no deep entanglement, just clarity. But clarity without depth is thin, and thin doesn't last. She complicated everything, but not in the way people warn you about. She didn't bring chaos. She brought meaning. And meaning is heavy in the best way. I started noticing how often I thought about the long term, not in grand romantic fantasies, in small integrations. Would she feel comfortable here? How would she handle this situation? What would her perspective be on this decision? That integration isn't simple. It's layered. It shifts how you move through the world. Love stopped being a feeling I experienced. It became a factor I considered. And that factor influenced my identity. That's where complexity lives, in identity shifts. Before her, I defined strength as independence. Handling everything alone, not needing reassurance, not relying emotionally. Now I define strength differently. Strength is showing up. Strength is communicating clearly. Strength is staying present when retreat feels easier. She complicated my definition of control. I thought control meant minimizing risk, minimizing vulnerability, minimizing dependency. But she showed me that control can also mean emotional discipline. Choosing patience over reaction, choosing conversation over silence, choosing repair over ego. That kind of control is harder and more meaningful. I began seeing how love expands responsibility. It's not just about how you feel. It's about how you behave, how you speak, how you respond when tired, how you react when misunderstood. Those behaviors determine sustainability. Sustainability isn't simple. It's intentional, and intention requires effort. I used to think effort meant something was wrong, that love should just flow. But flow without foundation is fragile. Effort builds resilience. We've had ordinary days that taught me more than any romantic peak. Days where stress was present, where schedules were tight, where moods weren't perfect, and still respect remained. Still, communication happened. Still, we chose kindness. Kindness isn't flashy, but it's foundational. And foundations are never simple. They're layered, reinforced, built slowly. I thought love was simple because I hadn't experienced love that required growth. Growth complicates comfort. It stretches boundaries. It asks you to become more than you were yesterday. She didn't demand I change. She inspired evolution. That inspiration feels like weight, but it's a good weight. The kind that builds muscle. Not strain, I realized that simplicity in my past wasn't peace. It was avoidance. Avoiding full investment. Avoiding emotional risk. Avoiding emotional risk, she removed the comfort of avoidance by being worth the risk. Risk isn't dramatic when it's aligned. It's steady, measured, conscious. There's something powerful about choosing complexity over convenience. Convenience is easy. It requires little reflection, little accountability, little growth. But complexity, intentional complexity, invites depth. Depth is what makes connection memorable, not because it's intense, because it's transformative. I've changed in small ways. I listen more carefully. I react more slowly. I communicate more directly. I reflect before assuming. Those shifts aren't accidental. They're responses to depth. She complicated everything because she made me care about sustaining something, not just feeling something. Sustaining requires strategy, patience, humility, consistency. Consistency is not glamorous. It's repetitive. And repetition builds trust. Trust builds longevity. Longevity doesn't come from simplicity. It comes from layered commitment. Commitment to understanding. Commitment to growth. Commitment to staying present. I don't miss the simplicity I once valued, because that simplicity kept me small. This complexity makes me expansive. Love now feels less like an emotion and more like a structure we're building together, brick by brick, conversation by conversation, repair by repair. I thought love was simple, until she complicated everything. But in that complication, I found clarity. Clarity that love isn't about ease, it's about intention, not about adrenaline, about alignment, not about avoiding difficulty, about navigating it together. And the truth is, I don't want simple anymore. I want meaningful. Even if meaningful is layered, even if meaningful requires growth, even if meaningful asks more of me, because what she complicated wasn't love. It was my understanding of it. And that deeper understanding feels stronger than simplicity ever did. Love isn't simple, it's deliberate. And I'm grateful she complicated everything, because in doing so, she helped me become someone capable of depth. And depth is what lasts. The version of love I almost missed, if you had asked me a year ago what love looked like, I would have described something clean. Two people meet. They feel something strong. They move forward confidently. They avoid unnecessary complications. That was my blueprint. Simple, efficient, controlled. I didn't realize that what I was calling simple was actually shallow protection. Because when she came into my life, everything I thought I understood about love started unraveling, not in chaos, but in depth. And depth is never simple. At first I resisted the complication, not outwardly, internally. I told myself I was just being careful, measured, responsible. But what I was really doing was trying to contain something that refused to stay small. She didn't overwhelm me with drama. She overwhelmed me with steadiness. And steadiness forces you to confront yourself. When someone is inconsistent, it's easy. You blame instability. You step back, you maintain emotional distance. But when someone is consistent, grounded, emotionally aware, there's nowhere to hide. You either rise to that level or retreat into fear. And retreat didn't feel justified. So I had to rise. Rising meant becoming more aware of my own habits, the way I shut down when conversations felt heavy, the way I minimized vulnerability to stay composed, the way I prepared emotionally for worst-case scenarios before they even existed. She didn't call those things out harshly. She just stayed present long enough for me to see them, and seeing yourself clearly is uncomfortable, but necessary. Love became complicated because it stopped being a feeling and started becoming a mirror showing me where I still guarded too tightly, where I still valued control over connection, where I still confused independence with isolation. I used to believe that love should feel effortless. If it's right, it flows. If it's right, it doesn't require adjustment. But that belief was built on surface experiences. Surface connections don't require growth. They stay light, predictable, replaceable. She wasn't replaceable. And that realization complicated everything, because when something isn't replaceable, you handle it differently. You move slower, you speak more carefully, you think beyond the present moment. I started considering her in my decisions, not because she demanded influence, because she mattered. That shift alone made love heavier, not burden heavy, responsibility heavy, responsibility heavy. Responsibility doesn't feel romantic, but it feels real. Real enough to reshape your priorities, real enough to challenge your habits, real enough to demand maturity. She complicated my understanding of vulnerability. Before, vulnerability felt like optional exposure. Now it feels like required intimacy. If you want depth, you must risk honesty. And honesty isn't always comfortable. We've had moments of tension, small misunderstandings, differences in perspective. In the past, those would have signaled incompatibility. Now they signal opportunity. Opportunity to practice communication. Opportunity to build resilience. Opportunity to choose each other again. Choosing someone repeatedly is not simple. It's disciplined. Discipline and patience. Discipline in listening. Discipline in listening. Discipline in staying present when pride tempts retreat. I thought love was simple because I never allowed it to demand transformation. Transformation complicates comfort. It stretches you, exposes blind spots, challenges ego, She didn't force transformation, she invited it. Through consistency, through steadiness, through emotional clarity, I began noticing how much I valued peace over intensity, how much I respected her ability to handle stress calmly, how much I admired her refusal to escalate conflict. Those qualities aren't flashy, but they are foundational. Foundation is never simple, it's layered, reinforced, built intentionally. I used to chase excitement. Now I protect stability. Excitement spikes. Stability sustains. Love stopped being about how high it could lift me. It became about how steady it could ground me. And grounding is complex because it involves shared responsibility, shared planning, shared growth. Growth is never linear. There are adjustments. There are lessons. There are lessons. Each one adds a layer. Each layer deepens connection. She complicated everything by making me want to grow alongside her. Not ahead, not separately. Alongside. That alignment feels powerful. And power rarely feels simple. There's something humbling about realizing that what you once called simple love was just limited love. Limited in depth, limited in vulnerability, limited in expectation. Now I expect more. More communication, more accountability, more shared intention. And those expectations require effort. Effort doesn't scare me anymore because I see the return.